When we think of Guadalajara, Mexico, we think ice and margaritas in a rustic cantina with tacos and a mariachi band playing nearby. What we don't normally think about is the whole city buried in ice. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in year 2 from the Weather Network in Canada. Ice comes in many shapes and forms, but it rarely comes in southwestern Mexico, especially the way it did on this day in weather history. It is known for tequila and mariachi music. Both were born in the state of Jalisco, but again, not known for being buried in ice. Normal temperatures for this time of year here is high 20s, low 30s. Now, their proximity to the Pacific coast is not necessarily complementary to being considered thunderstorm prone, but they are not unusual either. What is unusual is for towering convective storm cells to loom overhead and result in a full-on deluge of hail. Yeah, this storm packed enough firepower to unleash over 1.5 meters of ice that was dumped on the region. 1.5 meters of any precipitation anywhere is enough to declare a state of emergency. You get 1.5 meters of rain, you are flooded. You get 1.5 meters of snow, and you are buried, and there is likely structural damage under the weight. So for Guadalajara, the capital city of Jalisco, in western Mexico, to get socked with 1.5 meters of heavy hail, this was paralyzing and shocking, and I'm going to have to guess terrifying, all at the same time. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. There was news footage that showed trucks struggling to drive through the roads that were swallowed by ice. It was so bad that many drivers had to abandon their vehicles altogether when it became impossible to break through the thick hail. Now, just as an aside, can you imagine returning home and having to tell your mom or your dad or your own family that the reason that you did not return with the family car or truck is because you got stuck in a river of ice? Again, in southwestern Mexico. It was so bad that even they had to call in the army. And yes, that actually is a tongue-in-cheek callback, homage to the time Toronto Mayor Mel Lastman called in the army to help dig out his city. And yes, I have an episode on that too. That's actually my January 14th episode, and you can listen to it today wherever you listen to your podcasts. But I digress. The Mexican army did get called in to assist with relief efforts. So what happened? Convection, baby! A low-pressure system moving up and along the southern border, lining the U.S. and Mexico, contributed to developing storms that formed along what is called a convergence zone. You see, in meteorology, this is a region in the atmosphere where two prevailing airflows, coming from different directions, meet and interact. And by interact, I mean more like they duke it out for dominance. Along this boundary, you had a continental versus ocean current. Those are two air masses converging, and that will usually always result in rather, quote, distinctive weather conditions. And by distinctive, I mean 1.5 meters of hail. These convergence zones lead to a sharp upflow of air in this area of low pressure that, of course, because it's low pressure, draws upward, counterclockwise spin up. Anyway, and this causes a mass accumulation of vapor, rising higher and higher into the atmosphere, and that will form clouds. And from these, depending on how fast they form, I'm going to have to assume this was very quickly, because that would be convective, precipitation. It's unstable and volatile, and essentially, in this case, once these storms developed, all the ingredients came together for there to be what unfolded in what was a bizarro world hailstorm over Guadalajara, Mexico, this day in weather history. Tomorrow is July 1st, and that means Canada Day. Happy Canada Day to all of my followers in the true north, strong and free. I'm presenting an episode from what we have grown into a series called Weather in War. And tomorrow we hit one of the most historical battles in North American history, and one that so many films have been made about, and one that goofballs still reenact regularly. They are ridiculous, aren't they? Anyway, just how did the weather play into the Battle at Gettysburg? Find out tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May. Seriously, who the hell reenacts their own country's Civil War, for crying out loud?